Hello, everyone. Thanks for giving us your time today. I'm Ian Hamilton in the UploadVR studios, joined by several people across the internet in various ways. I've got the voice of E McNeill in my ear. Why don't you say hi, E?
Hello, everybody.
And then I've also got Don Hopper out there in virtual reality. That's whose view we're seeing up on this television.
Hello, hello, hello.
And then we've got Beck out there managing the show for us. As long as nothing goes haywire, we probably shouldn't hear from her. And then I should be able to see comments down here on my tablet. We're doing this for members first. So if you miss this live, it's because we're doing it for the members, and we wanted to do a little intimate conversation here with E first. And then, of course, we're making this public afterwards. We're also going to take any comments, any interesting things that we discussed during this gameplay stream and write an article up based on it. We talked to E a little bit about that. E, I'm tempted to give your backstory myself, but why don't you give your sort of history in VR for the audience out there?
Sure. Yeah, I'm always curious how other people would, describe that story or, my origin. But from my perspective, it almost feels accidental getting into VR. Around 2012, I went indie. I moved across the country and had a little, bit of money to try to survive on long enough to make a game or two. And coincidentally, that's also when I backed the Kickstarter for the Oculus Rift for the original DK1. And so that arrived, and one of the earliest projects that I attempted when I was an early indie game developer was an entry for the Oculus VR Jam, which was this competition Oculus ran where they basically said, like, we need some kind of content for this new device. So you have 3 weeks to make some new piece of content, and we'll, give out some small prizes for, whichever we think are the best few. And so for that, I made a demo that eventually became Darknet. It was called something else at the time. But it kind of had the same basic structure, the same concept, that you were like a hacker inside virtual reality. And it was kind of playing off some of the tropes from like Hollywood's vision of cyberspace. And I thought that went pretty well, but I showed it around, that sort of very early demo, to some people. And I concluded, like, maybe this wasn't going to be like my first big game. Maybe I'd work on something else outside of VR, unless it won the VR Jam. And then lo and behold, lucky me, it did. I got first place in one of the categories of that early competition. And so I decided that this was going to be like my first big project, and I made Darknet for the earliest Oculus VR headsets, which was the Gear VR Innovator Edition. Was the very first one to come out at the very tail end of 2014. And Darknet, looking much as you see it now, was technically the very first full game available on that platform. The reason being that all of the other launch titles were demos, because they told us kind of late in the process that they weren't going to have any money hooked up to the store, that they didn't have payments set up. And so everybody kind of downgraded their games to demos, except me, who decided I would just give away the full game for free because I thought that would be fun. Yeah, it's excellent business sense too. But yeah, it worked out.
And now it's $10, right?
And
Darknet Remastered is $10. We could save the question for later. I gave you a heads up that this question was coming. What can you say about sales over the course of 10 years here in the VR market? What is it like?
I mean, it's better now than it was in 2014. But yeah, I mean, it's changed a lot. It's kind of been a lot of ups and downs, and a journey. At the earliest point, there was just not that many people who had headsets, especially because they were expensive and not super good. It was kind of early adopters and people who were curious about the technology. And so myself and a lot of other indie devs were basically surviving on grants that Oculus was giving out to early indie game developers. And those were very much at like an indie scale, sort of like the mid 5 figures. Not enough to sustain a studio, but if you were just a solo brand new indie game developer, then there was nothing to stop you. And so that was really good early on. Then the Oculus Rift came out. Project Morpheus turned into PlayStation VR. Things started becoming a little more official and commercial, and I feel like that was still a really hard time. Some games I think were relatively successful on, like, when Steam VR came out with the HTC Vive, but I was still kind of scraping by on small grants. And I know that was kind of like a hard time. People were talking about like being a cockroach, that you'd survive anything until things got better. And then the big turn was in 2019 when the Quest came out. And the first, when Project Santa Cruz turned into the Oculus Quest and that became a thing, that changed everything. And suddenly, like, people, I think it was in some ways, I feel like that was kind of the first good headset. And I think that was when you started getting games that really were picking up steam in their own right, that weren't relying on external funding. Of course, there were always exceptions to that, Beat Saber being probably the biggest example of like a huge hit that came before all of that. But the Quest sort of made things feel like ripe, like a really powerful, good ecosystem.
So, how many of your games were made on your own, please quantify the sort of workforce behind your games?
Yeah, so I talk about myself as a solo dev, but that has never been accurate, never been sort of the whole story. So on all of my games, I've been kind of the primary programmer and designer, but I've always had help, sometimes on that and always on everything else. So for instance, on Darknet, I did all of the programming and design work, but I hired a 2D artist and a concept artist. There was a composer who made all of the music for the game. There was somebody who helped me with the story content for sort of fleshing out a lot of the news stories that you'd get after completing these different hacks. A lot of help along those lines. And that's continued from all of my subsequent games, where there's usually a group of 5 or 6 or more contractors who helped out. And on Ironlights, I actually had somebody working with me full time as a programmer. And on Ironstrike, that went up to 2 people working with me full time. So the size of my studio doubled and tripled over the course of my most recent 2 games. But it's still very, very small scale.
And these are still contractors, like you've brought them on for specific tasks. Is the way that relationship works? Is that
yes, yeah, more so in I'd say in some cases than others. In that, like, they're when I have somebody who's a full-time contractor, they are available to sort of work on helping program various parts of the game, and so that that becomes more generalized. Most of the people who work with me on my games are working on something specific. Like, I hire them to make art, and I'll say, here's some concepts, here's the specific models for weapons or props or whatever it is that I need done. Yeah.
Interesting. And I wanted to cover that because not to be too heavy on our stream, but there's massive layoffs in very oversized or large size studios, depending on how you want to frame that. And you've been solo or very, very independent, and that's the flip side of what you're describing, right? Is as much respect as you need to do to the fact that you're not a solo person, you're still about as solo as it gets in this market, right? Like, it's still mostly you behind these projects. And I want to understand, what do you think is the team size that the VR market can support right now?
I feel like by virtue of my experience working as primarily a solo developer, or quote unquote solo, that I don't have a lot of the knowledge or context to be able to speak about what works at larger scales. Because my impression is that there are studios who have been making it work, or who have changed size based on sort of what's happening in the market around them. And I have a lot of respect for that, because it seems really hard. I don't know to what extent being a solo dev is about my preference as a developer, versus, that I couldn't do it if I was trying to work at a much larger scale. That said, it doesn't feel like the market is very friendly to very large studios. And, I think working with a team of 15 or 20, that's not my impression is that's not a crazy thing to ask for in the wider world of game development or even indie game development. But it strikes me that, as something that would be quite difficult to pull off in VR right now. And, that the size of the budgets that you can or should be working with do still tend to be, on the smaller end, on the smaller range.
So, thematically, and I got to cover this for the audience out there. You collect you earn Bitcoin in this game.
You do.
You made this game in 2014, 2013. Did you buy any Bitcoin when you made the game? And how do you feel about that?
I did not buy any Bitcoin, and as you can imagine, I feel totally fine about that. I feel fantastic. No, one time I actually got tipped in Bitcoin. Somebody sent me, a link that said like, "Hey, you just got tipped Bitcoin. Here's how you can collect on it." And that was at a time when something like that was not necessarily a scam, though it may have been. Anyway, so I forgot about that for several years, and then when Bitcoin was worth something, I went back and tried to see if it was still there. Not true. No, that right. Whatever that was was no longer a going concern. But I comfort myself with the fact that
wallet address and all that.
Yeah, just input your credit card details. No, I also comfort myself with the fact that if I had bought Bitcoin 10 or 12 years ago, I certainly would have lost it in some kind of hack, or I certainly would have sold it long before it reached its current value. So, I think that is just not me temperamentally to get rich off that kind of speculation.
That's how you sleep at night. But have you calculate? Do you know the value of Bitcoin at the date you released Darknet? Is that a number you've got in your head that how much one Bitcoin was worth?
I mean, I was aware of Bitcoin even well before I made Darknet. I remember when it crashed from $300 to $3 or $30. I can't remember what it was. And thinking, well, that's it. Nothing can lose 10% of its value and still be a thing. And I remember I had conversations with friends in college about why it's fundamentally deflationary and therefore could never function as a real currency.
You immediately have the conversation about the friend. It's a common question to ask: who do I invest in? Who is going to be the winner here? Who do you think is going to be the winner? And I've never owned stock, and so I always just guess at that question. And the answer NVIDIA popped out of my mouth a couple times over the years. And I think of the value of NVIDIA over the course of 10 years covering this and how different things would be if I had taken my own advice when people ask me that question. And I can imagine it's a similar story for Bitcoin. Thinking about it at this point, what secrets do you want to reveal about the development of Darknet before we start moving through your gameography here? Because this is where you started, and I'm curious what you learned from this particular project.
Well, I don't know. Darknet, it was different in some ways from some of the design process of some of my later games, and in part, I think it was quite intentionally designed. That's maybe a weird word to use, but I was really enamored with some sort of high concepts about that I was learning from GDC talks and things like that. And I was actually sitting down with pen and paper at a local sandwich shop I'd go and work at. I'd walk to every day or so, and I would sort of diagram out or brainstorm high level concepts of how I thought Darknet should work, including sort of the various levels of gameplay that are happening and how they contribute and build on to each other. So like the probably the clearest example is that right here, what we're seeing now is Don is like inside one of the nodes of this network. And it is an entire puzzle in its own right, and one that might seem unsolvable, but I'm sorry, is definitely solvable. But
Seems
if
that
you
way
zoom out,
sometimes.
you're doing that because it's feeding into this larger puzzle, on the layer above it, with all of these different nodes, each of which contains its own randomly generated puzzle. And you can kind of feed into the two layers in different ways. So like, going into one of these nodes and hacking it gives you money that you can use at the higher level. And at the higher level, you can also purchase hydras and other sort of like tools that you can use to sort of auto-complete these puzzles or make them easier for yourself. So like, if earlier, Don used one of those tools to clear away some of the shields that protect some of these nodes. And that would, allow him to auto-complete a lot of these puzzles and kind of get that money for free, quote unquote. Yeah, but it works both ways. So like in the later, highest sort of skill levels of the game, you rely on being skillful at every level of the game. You need to not only know exactly how to progress at the network level, but within each node you have to be very, very good at figuring out how those puzzles work. I was trying to sort of combine the sort of themes of the game with the actual gameplay mechanics. So one example of that is like, I was constantly asking this question: what should it feel like to be a hacker, or rather, what is like the fantasy of being like a cyberpunk hacker? And part of that was, in these movies where there's like a hacker and they're doing cool stuff, there's always like this overflow of information. It looks really, really complicated, and somehow they understand it. And that's what makes them look cool to me. And so the aesthetic of this game was supposed to be like, right now, like this is filling your entire field of vision. It should feel, it's meant to feel like kind of overwhelming, like, oh my God. And especially if you've never played the game and you don't know what any of this stuff means, it's supposed to look like, how could you possibly even start to approach this? But once you've played the game a little bit, you start to gain some expertise, and you can become that cool hacker guy who actually does know how all of this works and knows how to exploit it. I also included like this idea that there should be hidden secrets in the game in lots of different places. So there's several places where that exists, but one that also serves as a good illustration of the complexity topic I was talking about before is the data view, which is something we saw a little bit of earlier. It's a mode you can turn on that gives you this sort of clearly cribbed from the Matrix digital rain effect.
Oh yes.
And it's something that you have to work up to in the game, and eventually you can unlock it, and it doesn't tell you what it does. It just says, hey, you get to unlock the data view. And then you turn this on and you see this, and it's like, oh, what is this? What could this possibly do for me? It's just a bunch of letters. Well, it turns out all of that can be useful. It's actually a really critical tool for the people, again, playing at like sort of the highest levels. And there are, plenty of people who play Darknet, and I never explained how it worked, but there's records you can find in like the game's subreddit of people talking with each other about experiments they're running and trying to figure out how that mechanic works, and eventually coming up with how you can use that tool to hack nodes for free. And it lets you sort of skip ahead in the most difficult levels of the game.
Fascinating. Really, 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 really cool deep dive there. Anything you want to cover, Don?
No, Ian, I've been loving just hearing you guys talk as I've played, because like he was saying, this is just something that you really get into, and when I start playing this, it captures my mind, and I feel like I'm hacking the Gibson, so to speak. So
yeah, a lot of people really have a lot of love for those hackers movies, and you sort of refer to those inspirations, but I would love to hear you really unfold specific scenes in your mind that have withheld the stand of, that you specifically drew from as you were pulling this together. What were the specific inspirations, and can you name them?
Yeah, so one confession I have is that I was kind of like broadly aware of a lot of these sort of tropes before I could really name any specific things that they necessarily came from. And I when I started making the game and I knew that this was what I wanted to do, I went on like a cyberpunk movie marathon where I went and like,
Nice.
out of my way to go find all of these scenes and movies and watch them all in a row so that I could, more knowledgeably like refer to like kind of what or see what someone might expect if they were also kind of in love with this concept. So I think one of the more clear ones is Johnny Mnemonic, which is
Oh yes.
not very good Keanu Reeves cyberpunk story, and it it involves him like downloading data into his brain directly, and it presents it as like this really like intense experience. He has to like bite down on something, because it's like
Mhm.
really shaking him up as it's and it represents this as like a flashing series of images that sort of communicate data somehow. And so when you complete a level in Darknet, when you hack the root node and acquire the target data, it tells you, congratulations, prepare for direct download, and then the data slams into your face
Oh,
and
nice.
gives you a rapidly flashing series of kind of vague data images. And it's meant to be that sort of feeling of like overwhelm, like downloading directly into your brain straight out of the movie. One fun thing I can add about that is that those flashing data images, which generally you can correctly assume are just kind of meant to look like Hollywood quote unquote data stuff, they actually contain some secrets, some stuff that allows you to do stuff in the game, access parts of the game that you normally couldn't. And that's just, that's again sort of trying to tie into this vibe that I wanted of like, this is full of hidden secrets. There's all this complexity that seems meaningless, but if you're that skillful or knowledgeable, you actually can figure it out and, kind of unlock what the secrets are.
Mm. Have you made any flat games in the last 10 years, or has it all been VR?
In the last 10 years, I think no. Yeah, before that, I had done a couple of flat games, yeah.
So,
I was gonna say you had some mobile games, I believe.
Mhm.
yeah, I'm trying to think of 10 years that makes you part of a very specific club of people that have been VR developers for 10 years. And I'm curious what lessons that might be takeaways from 10 years in this market for people that are catching up to it now. And there's lots of ways I can ask this question, right? Like, when you talk to family and friends, do you describe yourself as a game developer or a VR developer? And do you have to do any defensiveness of this medium, or is it like, do you worry that the headsets are going to stop being sold next year, or do you think this is your medium for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, that's a not a tricky question, but I don't know. It seems like it should be sensitive. I don't know how much it is, but I'll just try to answer straightforwardly. I've always described myself as a game developer or game designer, and
There you
not
go.
as like a VR developer. And that has been true since the very beginning, since when I was making Darknet and before, and is a reflection of, I think, my preferences and interests going into this. That I've always seen myself as somebody who likes game design, and I happen to be working in VR. And that I would also be happy working on, flat games or board games or, in-person field games. Like, it's just, games are really cool and fascinating. And it kind of sucks sometimes that you have to program stuff and work on software in order to make them in the way that you want. But, that's a means to an end for me.
What a beautiful description. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. That's
no
beautiful
worries.
right there. So thank you for that.
But I also think that there's, it's fine if you are, you know, more interested in the VR angle. And just a quick word on that, with regard to Darknet was, in some respect, made for people who were into the idea of VR, who were, you know, just enamored of the concept of putting on a headset and being surrounded by stuff. And one of the terms that I found in my old notes for Darknet was VR in love with its own reflection.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
I love that.
that was a deliberate design emphasis for this game. It was supposed to be like, you know, this is for somebody who wants that feeling of like kind of being on the leading edge of tech, of being a little bit cyberpunk, and wanted to sort of reward that and like play into it. I don't mean that in any sort of like exploitative like way. I never, you know, it's not like, oh, these suckers or something, they think that they're cool.
Oh, no.
It's like, no, it actually is cool. Like, this is what we're all into, much in the same way that like some of my later games are about the fun of like swinging around a pretend sword. Like, that's my fantasy too.
I was gonna say, I noticed that the progression, like you went from real-time strategy to this to puzzling, and now we're into physics-based sword swinging. So really cool to see you exploring all those different mediums over the years.
Don, do you want to start moving to the next one pretty soon? And we'll,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think we can go ahead and like start on that. Now, I did want to ask real quick though, since we are still in this, and you know, I came up playing a lot of your games on the Gear VR. So, do you have, since we now have the remaster of, you know, Darknet, are you planning on doing remasters for things like Skylight, Astraeus, you know, Tactera? Things like that.
I'm still on the fence about that.
Okay.
It partially depends, I think, on how I feel about having done Darknet's remaster, you know, a few months from now.
Okay.
And it also partially depends on sort of how much time I have to pursue that kind of thing, in part because I'm expecting my first kid to be born within a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Congratulations,
man. That is so awesome.
I feel that way too, but I do expect that that's going to, you know, change some of my schedule and priorities and whatnot.
Oh, it does.
yeah, it's quite a thing to change to being work from home with a young child in the home, right? And your VR headset can take you to your office at any time. And let me ask you that question. Actually, do you do any of your work outside of user testing inside of the headset? Do you do any coding inside the headset? Are you the literal hacker man as you're making the game, or do you do it on flat screens?
Slightly to my shame, no. I've never used VR for like productivity work. I've always just been in the games.
So not the literal hacker man while you make your games.
No, I've never quite been able to embody it.
So what is your display setup then for your coding? What do you work on?
It's modest as far as, you know, it goes for like, you know, full-time tech workers. I have two 27-inch displays on you know, my little IKEA desk workstation, and I have a gaming laptop sitting on top, and it's got enough plugs to run everything, all my headsets, monitors, you know, USB stuff. Yeah,
got it.
Nice.
We talked to, I think I'm going to start making that a habit of us trying to get the desk setups of our dev friends and sources.
I think it's fascinating, actually.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see what people do, and multi-monitor seems to be the standard, and it's just interesting to see who has ultra wides, who does stuff in VR, and whether that changes over time. And I remember talking with you, down, was it somewhere in Orange County, would have been 2015, 2014, right when I was trying to cover VR as a freelancer, and you had this first game out there, and I was coming to talk to you. What does it feel like? 10 years is a large chunk of your life to be devoted to one technology. Even if you just describe yourself as a VR or as a game designer rather than a VR designer, you've still spent a significant chunk of your time on this technology. Do you still see it getting to 1 billion people, as Mark Zuckerberg has painted as his dream for the better part of a decade. Do you see it getting there?
I don't know. I guess if I think I have to leave it at I don't know. That I have always seen these, headsets and this technology through the lens of my own interests, and that means that I've seen them as game consoles. And I think that has been a pretty accurate way to see them up through sort of the current line of Meta Quest headsets, things like that. And that they have been, pretty good value propositions in that frame, that the Quest is a good game console. And then what happens after that, I think, depends a lot more on, getting to 1 billion people is not something that the PlayStation or the Xbox or the Switch does. And nobody considers them failures in that respect. I think getting to 1 billion people depends on their value as other things, as AR devices, sort of everything devices. And that's a lot harder for me to speculate about.
Fantastic. What a great answer for I don't know. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the thought there. Are you ready to move to the next one, Don?
I think I'm about ready to transition here. So wonderful playing Darknet Remastered. This has just been like an overdose of nostalgia, just coming back and slapping me in the face, and I'm loving it.
Honestly, it was for me too. I'd forgotten how long it's been.
Oh yeah, and me too, right? And I hope our audience responds in the same way to this. There are going to be a large number of people. That's kind of who we're doing this for. Is these people who remember the game, maybe wanted a dev track, to explain some of the behind the scenes and how it works. And given the remastered, right, we're starting out with it, right, as for maybe people could go be playing the remastered version with a YouTube video playing in the background, giving them that bit of background. So why don't you place this game that Don just pulled up in time? When did this game start coming together?
So this is Ironstrike. This is my most recent game, and this one, it originally came about as a sort of spin-off or spiritual sequel to Ironlights, which was my first Quest game. So over the course of about 2021, I had a lot of requests for stuff to add to Ironlights, which is like a dueling game, sword fighting game. And there was requests for co-op mode, for people to add magic fighting to the game, more ranged stuff, more of longer endless mode or story. And all of those things I didn't feel like quite fit within the format of Ironlights. But as I started to think about them, this new game sort of took shape in my head as Ironstrike. And so this is kind of like this wish fulfillment of all the things that I kind of wanted to have in Ironlights. And there were two other influences that I can point to. One of them is the game Hades and other sort of roguelikes, which I was really into, this sort of action roguelike format. I loved the idea of, kind of creating a build as you go through the game and combining different abilities in really powerful ways. The other big influence is the COVID lockdowns, where I was spending a lot of time inside, and I really wanted to work on a game that had big open levels and, a wide open sky above you. I just wanted that feeling again. And so that kind of dictated a lot of what became Ironstrike. These wide open levels, 4-player co-op roguelike structure that has, melee combat, ranged combat, and its own magic system. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Very cool.
Yeah, we kind of jumped to your most recent from your earliest.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
there's a big
there.
middle ground there. And I noticed Don messing with the actual environment, trying to place his hand onto the rocks and to see if the hand would respond.
You knew
to
what
the
I was
rocks.
doing. Yeah.
Is that is that something a conscious decision to let the hands go through the objects of the space?
Partially. I think part of being a solo dev or indie dev, is that you can just kind of focus on like the stuff that you care the most about. And so, for example, I've never cared all that much about like being able to do stuff like place your hand on a rock and see the hand sort of mold to that shape, especially when your hand in real life is not stopping, is not
I get
getting
that.
any feedback. It's just not something that ever felt that important to me. Similarly, as you're seeing here, like the sword is not bouncing off against anything in real life, because your hand is not going to bounce in real life. And to me, that felt more important. However, huge amount of effort was put into the actual physics of the sword in your hand. So when you swing it around, it's not just the sort of like the feeling that you get in a lot of games where they add some drag to it to try to prevent you from just sort of wiggling the sword around. It
does seem to have weight.
Yeah, it's doing quite an accurate physics simulation. And part of that is that it rewards wider swings and sort of pretending like you have something that heavy in your hand, something that has a center of mass that is offset from where your hand is. And if you do kind of wider swings, put some wind up into it, stand up and use your whole play space, you'll get better results. You can actually swing heavier weapons harder, faster, things like that. You can also do some fun stuff like tossing the weapon up in the air to yourself, and
I love that when you can literally like toss it up, catch it. Noticed you couldn't catch it with my other hand though.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's partially doing stuff in the way that felt more important to me, which is that you're going to be spending 99% of the time, with your sword in your main hand, and you want your shield in your other hand, and you would like them to just be where you need them to be.
Gotcha.
And that, I wanted to really focus on the stuff that was going to matter in combat. And, when you're trying to do sort of deeper things, as I saw it, with, handling these weapons, as opposed to more of like a immersive physics sandbox. And I think that, there's definitely a place for that. And maybe this is sort of talking about like the difference before of like VR developer versus game developer. I was always more interested in the gamey stuff than the simulation stuff.
That makes sense. I just, one of the reasons I test that is that as a VR gamer, the solidity of a world is actually important to me. Mm-hmm. So, because it kind of takes me out of immersion when I'm holding a sword and it can pass through objects.
Yeah, I think I can respect that. It's, it's just not an experience that I have myself when I play VR games. When I play these games, the first thing I do is try, grabbing my sword, and how convenient is that for me to do it? And when I swing it around, does it obey physics in exactly the way that I, expect it to? And for me, that's much more about like the way that it moves through the air than the way that it collides with the world.
I'll tell you what, it feels great. I mean, the physics of the weapon handling in Ironlights feels incredible.
It's such a fascinating thing to think about the tension here between the two requests, right? I think the physics thing that Dawn prefers really helps with roleplay. It helps you lean into the character that you are a little bit, to like feel like you can pound the shield or pound your chest, or express yourself visually to the by hitting something with your fist because you're mad at it. It helps layer you into the role play a little bit when that happens. But I totally understand the other priority here, right?
And I will say that not both people will have different priorities about this, and also the data would suggest that most players are kind of not of my type. Most players care more about the being able to sort of like express themselves, or in some cases goof off within a game world, and that you can see some of that in the popularity of something like Blade and Sorcery, which is much more sort of a physics sandbox type of sword fighting game, and Gorilla Tag to an even greater extent in terms of like being able to have a place where you can do fun stuff with the world and express and goof off. But it's I'd say a lot less focused on some of the more like game dynamical stuff that really fascinates me. One thing that you talked about earlier was about how I sort of switched at one point from doing somewhat abstract real-time strategy, puzzle, and other types of strategy games to doing action games. With Ironlights, it was suddenly it's a dueling game where you have a sword and are fighting in real time with somebody else. And yet, one thing that players have sort of pointed out to me is that I have kind of turned all of these games into strategy games in some way. That they all have a layer that is sort of like strategic or more sort of like abstract game focused, and and a lot of that in Ironlights is about how you build out your character, which skills you choose, and sort of ways that incentivizes kind of different play styles.
Interesting. Fascinating. And I've got a question from Arlen. So one of our regular members,
Hey,
frequent,
Arlen.
frequent viewer, often in our comments with really, really thoughtful questions. And he's had a bit of an obsession lately with the idea of controllers that can holster themselves to your wrists, basically, so you can basically go from hand tracking to controller tracking really quick. We've seen some ideas like that at conferences like CES at the beginning of the year, or SIGGRAPH, where we see interesting research ideas like this. Are ever one of your games? How did you? Yeah, how do you think about input, and what do you think is the future of input here? Because you went on the full path from what was the input scheme for Gear VR to adapting that for the Quest of today, and what do you see as the future?
Yeah, I mean, the Gear VR, it began with 3 degrees of freedom head tracking. So, the movement of your head aside from rotation is ignored. You can really just keep your head in one place. And the input was a tiny square trackpad on the side of the headset and a single back button. And that was actually pretty expressive. I thought it was powerful for certain types of applications, for especially sort of point and clicks type of stuff. It was great for Darknet, for example. And that's one of the reasons why in that 3 degree of freedom era, up to sort of the Oculus Go, I was focusing more on more abstract type strategy games. Eventually we got the Vive, and especially when the Quest came out, I felt like there were games that were really proving the value of hand tracking, or controller tracking, I should now say, in a way that I wasn't quite expecting. I didn't really see the extreme value of controller tracking right away until I played Beat Saber and Superhot a little bit. And once I did, it was very clear to me that my next game needed to take full advantage of that. And I decided to try to do, sword fighting in the way that, I thought was proper. Because I think that's, again, sort of like a core fantasy, or, a key thing that a lot of people trying out VR wanted to experience. And so, yeah, I think that's something that, you could see coming, but I didn't understand before then how much that is almost like the key part of VR. It almost feels more about the hands and the controllers than it feels about the eyes to me. So with that said, I don't know where controls go next necessarily. I think hand tracking is convenient compared to controller tracking, but the lower degree of precision can be killer for the types of games I think that I tend to like. And then I think there's sort of another generation of controls on the horizon. I forgot actually the term for it, but actually, Ian, do you know what it's called? The thing you could wear on your wrist that could detect the sort of
neural wristband. Yeah,
that's the term.
Wristband. There's a couple different terms for it, but neural wristband is what we're calling it right now.
Yeah, I think that is very intriguing to me, because I think if it's done really well, if it's very precise, if you basically never have sort of mistaken inputs and whatnot, that offers sort of a best of all worlds possibility. And of course you could imagine even like more specific and advanced controls for certain types of games, something like immersive experiences where you're holding a gun controller, or really advanced stuff that can apply force feedback. But in terms of sort of like mass applications, I'm mostly curious about what happens with those kind of neural inputs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah, it was
that's where we are
fascinating.
too. Yeah,
I
and
tried I
Arlen.
tried the I'm sorry, I was going to say I tried the Mudra band at CES, and it was actually fascinating to see how it was picking up on that neural signal only. So,
Yeah, Arlen is asking, is there an XR input method that could make a game close to StarCraft and Age of Empires level of real-time strategy possible in XR? And I think that's what we're curious about. We all want to know whether the neural wristband can hold up to that kind of speed of input, that kind of level of, I don't know, managing that many items out in front of you. Like,
Mhm.
uh,
having
that's
having
not
custom
easy to do.
macros, and yeah, I mean, you'd have to do all sorts of custom macros, and they did talk about that, that that was going to be a possibility where you can go in and program like different spells as this gesture and different. So it just really would depend on how many functions it can remember at the same time.
Mhm.
One of the
It might be
things, though,
interesting with that you mentioned of spells to at some point show off how magic in Ironstrike works,
Yeah, okay.
where it is a
Yeah.
gestural system. Um, but no pressure. I could also
I was gonna
join you in
say,
there
I
if you
need
ever
to
feel
drop
like it.
back, and I was gonna say, or if you want to come in, yeah. I've not ever done any of the magic in Iron Strike actually, so that would
I
be
think
new for
getting you
me.
guys face to face would be the coolest thing to do right now, and I
It,
can
it,
be a
it might
third
be kind of
person.
cool, actually. That might be interesting. Um, so yeah, if you want to come on in, I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah. If you quit out to the menu,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead and hit abandon game.
Okay.
And yes. And then,
It's
so
only
once we
it's
get
only the
into a
members, though.
match, other people won't be able to join us. But
Right.
otherwise, we do have to share like some sort of tag or code to match up together.
Which I don't think will be a problem. So I guess if one of our members sees the code and decides to join, it will not destroy the show today. I
We could
wouldn't be
Well,
also
worried
vote
my
to
about
kick
it.
them,
screen
frankly.
actually just went black, so
Hmm.
not sure what's going on here. Might
I
have to
guess,
drop out of the game and come back in.
yeah, I guess go ahead and quit out for now. And yeah, I'm
Hmm,
not sure what's going on with that.
back to the Enterprise here.
I do love that
See.
home environment. That's my
I do. Oh, my desktop's off the screen. Well, we were trying to show my cool desktop, but that's okay. So yeah, my custom home environment, I put those back in last night, and I have been missing this. I've got this, the classic Enterprise, and the holodeck now as home environments. All right, starting Iron Strike now.
Was there ever a decision, to name the company or name you and your effort as something else? Because not a lot of people go by a first letter as their first name, but also just that's the brand of your entire development effort. Is there something specific you're trying to say there with using your name as your development studio?
um, yeah, I mean, early on, back in 2012, there was some conversation about whether one should, as an indie dev, present as like a company or as a person. And since I was working solo, and I just kind of liked the idea, I decided that I was just going to try to publish as myself. And I just go by E McNeill in my private life. I have since the start of college. Um, yeah, and that was just always comfortable for me.
You told me sometimes I'm remembering this a decade later. You tell journalists different E stands for different things just to mess with them. I remember that.
That
Yeah.
was something I did for a brief moment and got in trouble for. Not in trouble, but I thought that would be like a funny gag, and then I eventually kind of felt like maybe that was mean or boring. And then like 5 years or later, way long after that, somebody said, and this was introducing me to somebody else and said, and this is Ebenezer McNeill. And I had to explain that that wasn't actually my name.
Fantastic detail. Thank you for that,
That
E.
is so cool.
Or
That is great.
Elvis.
All
Um,
right, why don't you guys get in
Elvis
together?
yeah, go ahead and hit private match.
L.
And
Ron McNeil. There you
good
go.
one.
Okay, so
I
private
typed in the
match.
code UVR lowercase,
UV. Oops.
and then the little
All right.
enter at the bottom right. One further down, or no, that
No,
was just
well,
UV.
that's my controller glitching. Sorry.
No worries.
Stand
Um,
by. Yeah, back. There we go.
okay, all falls well. You should join me. I see
I
you.
should. Hey, there we are.
Hello.
All right.
Welcome, welcome.
So actually, the first time I played this multiplayer with a good friend of mine,
Mhm.
Eric Hartley. So,
Oh, nice.
this
Yeah.
is great to see you in the game. So, fantastic. All
Cool.
right. So you lead, I follow. What are we gonna do?
Sure. So come on over here to my fine selection of weapons, and why don't you pick?
Hmm.
Actually, we were talking about the magic stuff. So why don't you go ahead and
That's
pick the
right. So
wand,
we'll do the wand here.
and I will try to pick something. Or hopefully, I don't destroy my microphone over the course of doing this.
Okay.
And yeah, why don't you come over here for a second? You can take a second to try out the magic
Okay.
system.
Ooh, I love that reflection on the water. It's great.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so I see we've got some gestures starting here. Okay, so let's see, fireball. Like that. Like that. Okay.
And there you go.
Nice.
So
All right.
the game is kind of divided into two types of spells. Right now, you only have
Okay.
the two because you just started out with some basic, a single skill.
Okay.
But there's always a very simple, quick cantrip like that one, the fireball, and then there's something that's a lot more complex and involved, and it's something that, as you sort of memorize the actions and learn how to do it more fluidly, can be cast very quickly. So why don't you try casting Balefire, the other spell?
Okay. And let's see, balefire will be. How do I select it?
So when you first start casting, you should see
Well, it gives me
two
two
spells available.
icons. Right.
And you
Okay.
just draw the wand across the line for the spell that you want to cast.
Okay. Oh, I
And then
see.
keep on doing that.
I think I did fireball again.
Mhm.
Oh, right. Yep. Yeah, I did fireball again. Okay. So yeah, this
I
part
see
I'm
the
having
timer.
difficulty. Yeah, I see the timer, but I like, okay, he said, so like if I do that, uh, oh, I see, balefire. Now I get it. Okay.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing is he's having trouble deciding which direction he needs to be doing the
Yeah,
move
I
in.
can't
Oh, I'm sorry.
tell which.
I should be looking at your screen. I forgot that I can peek.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Um,
you are trying to draw along the line. What you want to be doing is crossing through it, like you're breaking the line, like that.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So
Like
why
an
don't you
See,
try
I thought
opposite.
I
casting
was
again?
supposed to be like following the direction of the slash that
Mhm.
it's showing me.
Yeah,
Okay. All right.
the
I
first
got it.
time it comes up, it should bring up like sort of arrows to make that slightly more clear.
I
But
see. Okay.
yeah, so while that one is sort of still, what do you call
Okay,
it?
I get it now. I get
Regenerating,
it
you can
now.
cast the other
Okay,
one.
there we go.
Mhm.
There we go. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes
So
more
one of
sense
those
now.
has like
Okay,
high cooldown, and the other one is fairly cheap to cast.
and I see
Um,
that. Yeah, the Balefire is still cooling down right now. So,
mhm. Yeah,
okay,
that it's really good, but very expensive, and you can only cast it once every like 45
gotcha.
seconds. But I'll tell you what, we can go in the game. I am going to
Okay,
play really defensively, like a tank, and try
okay.
to protect you. And you can take your time if you want, and maybe cast
Yeah,
the
yeah.
big
I'll
spell
try
on
to
one of
do
the
some
guys coming
spells and
up.
stuff. Yeah, let's
Okay,
do it.
come with me.
All right.
That's beautiful.
I have to
I
show
love
off.
it. Yeah, of course you do. You got to flex, man.
By the way, is my audio being what's the word? Duplicated or anything? I could try to mute
No, no,
myself.
no, no, no.
I think Beck
Currently,
would
I'm
mention
only
something
hearing
if it was
you.
a problem, yeah.
Yeah, I'm only hearing you through our audio right now, so this is
Great.
perfect. And while we're here, before we get started, yeah, I gotta say, I really love the art style in here. I love the color
Thank you.
choices. I love just how everything is textured and skinned, and like coming up and seeing the iridescence on the trees and things like that is
Mhm.
just beautiful.
These I spent way
So
too much time on the sort of crystal flora, but one thing that you
yeah,
may not be able to see in the flat screen is that these kind of like shapes that
yeah,
are like flowing through have some depth to them. They have like a
they do.
consistent depth within each of these plants.
I noticed that. And they also have like a translucence almost where it looks
Oh,
like
they
I've
do.
got an effect kind of inside of it.
Yeah, you
And
can
I'm
actually
kind of
see some
digging,
of the level
really
through.
digging on that.
You can see some of the level through some of these, but
Yeah,
and that's its own whole technical discussion. Actually, every single plant in here has a small like cube map of the entire level
really?
around it built in. Yeah, and there's like a whole special way that I did that. Um,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, yeah. It turns out you can bake a lot of them if they're fairly blurry for the small plants, and
Uh-huh.
you kind of can combine them into one giant texture. But again, that's
Oh,
its
very
own
cool.
whole discussion.
Yeah, very, very cool. No, I'm a graphics guy, so like
Oh,
I
wonderful.
always look at the shinies when I jump into a game.
Yeah.
So, all right.
I never did any shader programming before I did Ironlights. Um, so yeah, I think I've got these two guys distracted on me. So why don't you take your time and oh, there's a third one. Unfortunately, I forgot we spawn more
That's all right.
enemies.
So, is it possible to have like a sword and the wand, or
That's something that I've been hoping to add as like multi-classing eventually,
okay?
but it's not something that's in the game right now. Yeah, I'll try and protect you a little bit better.
Got him. I just need to move more.
So if you're using balefire, make sure you get real close to them before you fire it. Oh, just too
I
far
missed
away.
it. Yeah, I
So
was.
close.
Okay. As he just says, get close to him before you fire it.
It's sort
It's
of
a little
a
easier
short-range
said when you're
cone.
like, not getting pummeled.
Yeah, I love the. I'm
But
getting. I'm getting.
shield would be good here too. That way I could like deflect their things. Like
Now that you
pull up
can get
the
one of the weapons that you can upgrade to, does allow you to what's it called? Sorry, I'm hitting my microphone a little bit. Does allow you to cast spells while you have a shield.
Oh, I can cast magic missiles by flicking my wand at an enemy. Oh, I got a little. There we go. We got a little ranged weapon going on. Liking that. Ooh, liking the little wispy effect that it does. Alright. Come on, give me some spells,
But I'll
y'all.
lock them down until you want to shoot them.
You do it. You do it.
Very nice.
Oh, right in the chest. All right. Loving that. Can I toss my wand? I can.
I love it. That was really fun to see Don learning that he has to move while also, nailing the gestures. That's quite an undertaking while on live with the dev of the studio.
Juggling a lot of
No
things
kidding.
here, Ian. Juggling a lot of things here.
Yeah, and you've just gotten some enchantments that you can use. It's sort of like to play the support character if you wanted, or you can cast them on yourself. If you want to. For instance, if you wanted to play with magic missiles,
Jinx and Fortune. Okay.
Yeah, if you cast Fortune on yourself, it would make many of your magic missile attacks do a lot more damage. Yeah, now this one, when he hits me, I'll take significantly less damage than I did before. So you can sort of curse them as well.
So what's the progression like? How insane do your battles get at the high levels of this game? How many enemies on screen and that sort of thing?
Pretty insane. Actually, that's something that has been kind of pumped up in recent versions of the game. So there's never like a million enemies coming at you at once, in part because, honestly, one of the big challenges... There I go, hit my microphone. One of the big challenges of this game, making it, was about just kind of like the space that players have. That if there's just people surrounding you, it tends not to feel very good.
Okay.
And so
I can see that.
yeah, and another big thing is like there's a ton of effort put into the ways that the enemies split up in between the different players and who they focus on. But the individual enemies do get a lot more difficult than this. And one of the things that has been added in sort of a lot of the post-launch updates has been boss enemies of different types. So we're playing like a normal, basic run of the game right now, but higher level players have access to what's called Archon runs, which include much more difficult enemies. And beyond that, in the most recent update, we've added mini bosses. So at the end of each level, you end up fighting an enemy who has some special tactic or stats or special ability.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
What is your plan for support of this game long term? I'm seeing a question of Arlen asking, is this an MMO or a standard multiplayer? And if it's an MMO, and I mean this with respect, how can MMOs avoid falling into the idea of rinsing and repeating that traps so many other MMOs? So a couple of questions in there for you to deal with.
Yeah, I feel like... Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I feel like the question of rinsing and repeating is a challenge that I think almost every game is going to have, unless it's sort of a self-limiting, a narrative game that's meant to be played once. It is not an MMO, to answer that first question. It is a roguelike, though, so it is meant to be something that you can play many times. And part of what is intended to allow more replayability is the variety of builds and sort of approaches you can go for, including between your team. So right now I am sort of trying to play the role of tank or protective player to try to make some room for Don to be able to play a caster kind of in whatever way he wants without having to focus too much on his own defense. And Don, for his part, he could be playing as a somebody who focuses on the really big spells that can do a ton of damage at once, or as somebody who can shoot tons of small attacks at an enemy, and he would need to focus on building up his mana regeneration and things like that, or as more of a support player. And of course, Don also has access to a bunch of defensive spells, so he can get one that allows him to fly or to turn invisible.
Noticing that, yeah, I got levitation now, and I got all sorts of other things starting to pop up here. It's interesting playing from this perspective because I'm normally the tank. So
now this is going to be difficult, I must say.
Oh yeah,
yeah, we have.
I'm feeling
this is one of those mini boss fights. So you see our enemy is flying around us right now. And beyond that, getting healed by the healer on the left.
Excuse me. Ah, there we go. Oh no! I died right as I was about to hit him with the balefire.
I'm seeing you as a ghost now.
I was. I'm so dead. Oh, I'm ghostly.
Yeah, I took out the healer.
So do I regen, or do you have to come heal me, or how does that work if I die?
Everybody gets healed at the what is it called? The start of each round. And so if I survive this, you will be coming back.
I will come back. Okay.
So I'm going to see if
so interesting. Now I can just become the camera on your battle here. This is
this is a fantastic spectator game.
Yeah, it is.
Be a good camera, Don. You're it's like a live match.
I'm on it.
So one thing, for instance, that I'm doing here is I'm not actually attacking him very much. I'm sort of building up my potential attacks so that I can use a ton of them at once. And the reason for that is I chose to get a skill that gives me combo bonuses.
Okay.
And so if I can sort of hold out, then I can do a bunch of attacks at once that will build up the amount of damage that they do at a time. And so I was able to do chew through all of his armor. I'm on a sort of second health bar now, and I guess you'll take my word for it that that's a lot more effective than it could be.
Oh no, I'll take your word for it.
The tricky thing is not destroying my microphone in the process. Normally I'm standing up and stepping away from my desk. There we go.
No, you got a Yeti. You said you had a Yeti. That's a good mic.
Thank you.
You should be fine.
And so I have a choice now on my screen of whether I want to pick a weapon that's fairly defensive. It's like a sword with a nice shield, or I can pick a mace.
Oh yeah,
that's
I did.
really
I just got a
top-heavy.
staff.
Oh yeah, that's great because you
I
can
just
block with that.
Yeah, I was gonna say now I've got something I can block with.
Mhm.
All right. So very cool, man.
Thank you.
Loving this.
I don't know if we're gonna. We'll decide if we want to jump into other games. But I feel like we've done a good job here, going from Darknet
I
to
was
the
gonna say
latest
that we
game.
had really
Yeah.
kind of planned on Ironstrike and Darknet for today. So I mean, I do have Ironlights loaded if we did want to show that one.
I'd be happy
Well,
to.
But
well, I think this. What I
we
wanted to
also
ask
have
about
game
Iron
stream
Lights
too.
was,
So
you've got, yeah, we're going to go to another stream here, I think, today. But the thing I wanted to explain what Iron Lights is and how, and the problem you were trying to solve with it in comparison to the problem here, because
you want me to jump over there?
1v1 combat is hard to do.
Yeah, it's a very different
I was gonna say y'all talk about that. I'll jump over. So
Sure. Would you like me to join you there?
all right. You can
Yeah.
if you want. If not, I know I did the tutorial last night, so I could just redo the tutorial. Either way.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
well,
the it's basically the same system for joining up together. So we could do the exact same thing basically that we did here.
Sure.
I could create a game, and
I guess what I like, it was interesting doing it all in slow motion.
Mhm.
That's one thing I think we'll see here once the game starts, that I took away from my brief playtime last night, just making sure everything worked. So
and I'd love for you to talk about the replays feature at some point here, and how you built that, because that was so cool.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. That has been a quite a journey. So I didn't actually see. Did you enter the go to the bottom right, edit private game tag?
edit private game tag. Okay, there we go.
Now
And
you
is it
can
the
hit
same one
enter
from last
UVR.
time?
Perfect. I think you just hit done
Done
for
right
this one.
there, yeah.
Yeah, I
Fine,
was hitting. Yeah, there we go.
And then
Okay.
join private game on the right.
Join private game. There we go. All right, here we are. There you are.
Okay.
Wow. All
Um,
right.
let's see.
And let me choose a class here. So we got Duelist, Monk, Ninja, Knight, Reaper, Crusader, Samurai, Berserker, Dragon, and Scourge.
Dragoon.
So, what do you want me to be?
Dragoon.
Dragoon? Okay. I am Dragoon.
Okay.
Yeah, I got you.
So this is.
Ooh.
I love
Ironlights.
this right here where it's like moving me out into the arena. I actually literally felt like my living room floor was like moving underneath my feet.
Mhm. Do you see the stadium lights
Yeah, I do.
showing up on the sides?
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've seen this, to be honest. This looks
On
so
the
much
shadows
different.
were good. Yeah, the shadowing. Oh, that's nice.
That's again its own whole technical discussion.
Yeah, I was gonna say the light reflections here. Loving that.
Thank you. Yeah.
I need some clink, E.
Sorry.
I'm just
about
saying.
that.
Because I want to like taunt you. I want to like bang my. Come on, buddy. Come on.
This
You
game
know?
also, I mean,
Beat my chest.
in part because of the different way that the physics work in this game, there's no gravity applied to the weapons. They'll sort of freeze.
Yeah, I
in midair
noticed
where you let them go.
they're definitely different than they were in Ironstrike. Yeah.
And people actually have used that in sort of clever ways to sort of do some fun expressive stuff. But yeah, again, I think that's sort of just a difference about like sort of the different focuses that people might have as they build this game. It is sort of a reflection of like what I most care about.
That's reflection, though. You say reflection, and all I'm doing, my eye just keeps catching these shadows and that reflection.
And
just look amazing.
You got that Batman effect nailed.
I
It's
do.
crisper than the Batman shadow.
It is. Oh wow. I mean, I am loving that. Sorry, I totally geek out on stuff like that. So
these are like it's using sort of some tricks that you could only use in very certain circumstances. So these are projecting shadows. It is using a simplified version of the mesh, the geometry of your character, and flattening that against the ground, and then just using like a subtractive shader model to make it look like a shadow.
Well, I
Um,
mean, the fact that it's moving with the light, I mean, the external sources are playing on it perfectly. Your shadow looks darker than mine due to the lighting. I mean, there's just so much going on in here
mhm.
right now visually that I just don't see in a lot of other games on Quest 3 even. So I just have to commend you for what you've done here. This looks
Thank you.
absolutely fantastic.
And you can see some of it should even reflect. If I step back, the light of your weapons should reflect against my
Oh,
armor,
it
for
does.
example.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
That is so nice. Okay.
But yeah,
All
so
right.
this game was built to be like a 1v1 fight, sword fighting, a melee combat game. Um, and so it was built with, a very different focus than Ironstrike. And part of what felt fun to me about that was like doing sort of slow motion stuff, trying to like sneak in attacks, around your opponent. And so when we go into melee, all of the physics go into slow motion.
Mhm.
Um, and the way that this game, the kind of mechanic this game was built around, is that when I swing my sword, it breaks against your weapon, and then
Right.
everybody has to reload their weapons by pulling them
Hold
back.
their right. I thought that was interesting. It took me a minute to really kind of get my head wrapped around that. That it was almost like I was like pulling my weapon out each time I wanted to strike.
Mhm. Yeah,
So very
and
cool there.
and those kinds of mechanics, again, that's sort of like again going back to that theme of that. I tend to be interested in these more abstract, gamey, proceed. What's the word? Like game dynamic stuff. And for some players, they kind of, they got into it and they figured out exactly, oh, careful, you're stepping outside of sort of your bounds.
Sorry.
It'll
I
penalize
was
you.
just looking at the weapon spinning in midair. I thought that was
Yeah.
interesting.
Um, and yeah, so I think for some players, it really works for them. They get really into it. And, all of this sort of has a purpose that works to produce a pretty good competitive dynamic. So, for example, like, we go into slow motion, you have to reload your weapons. And also, if you look on the Jumbotron back there, I have limited energy. And once that
Right.
runs out, or if I choose to retreat, then I go back to sort of being out of reach of you. And all of this, kind of produces a good dynamic that I really like. However, there's definitely a population of players who don't want any of that, who feel like that's sort of limitations, and they want a sandbox. They want to be able to walk up to you and hit you with a sword because that's what you can do.
Right.
Well, I mean, you can't do that in real life. You get arrested. You take my
Well,
point.
that we would hope not. Yeah, that
Yeah.
would not be good.
hmm
So
Um, so yeah, I think it's one vision of like how you could make sword fighting work in VR, despite the fact that like your hand won't stop when you hit something, um, despite the sort of issues that would naturally
right.
come from trying to do like a real facsimile of what combat could look like. And
Okay, and it's interesting you said the hand won't stop, and I think I just got your earlier statement when I was talking about that in Iron Strike, that even though the weapon would stop if I hit something, my hand would continue to move in the real world, and now I can see your point in the difference of the immersion factor there.
mhm.
So
Yeah,
Um,
and I think different people are sensitive to sort of different parts of that. For me, it
yeah,
feels better if the weapon keeps moving because my hand kept moving, and I want my hand
because your
my
hand
weapon
kept moving,
safe.
right?
For other
Okay.
people, they see this and they're saying, "Why is this? Can the sword go through solid ground?"
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right,
so
well,
why did you decide to make Ironstrike and Ironlights as two separate games and not put all this together into one? Was that ever part of your thinking?
Well, I think part of it is that Ironlights is made really, really specialized. A lot of the stuff that you can do here, for example, these spotlights that have, a light and a perfect shadow for each of us that reflects off each other's armor, and even stuff
Don,
like when
attack
we're
him now
close to
while
each
he's
other.
answering the question. This is your only chance to beat the dev.
I know,
Um,
right? This
sorry,
might
I
be the
attacked
only
first.
time I ever win.
No, I can trick you. I've got some range
Yeah.
attacks.
Oh, I see how you are.
hmm Um, but now I've forgotten what I was saying.
See,
Was
that's
it
it.
important?
We need to be doing our interviews, like we need to be asking you the hard questions while you're trying to stay alive in your
Yes,
own game. I
there
think
you
that's
go.
the ultimate idea.
Um, yeah, if you wanted to throw a dagger at me, you can hold the the right trigger or the trigger for it, and then yeah, there it is, swing through.
Okay.
The question is,
How,
so I
how,
think
how
we
do I
should probably
release
end
it
the
though?
conversation, end our stream here pretty soon here, and get you
Yeah, we
to
got another one to
normal
jump over
game
to.
stream.
Sure, no worries.
If there's anything else you want to add about your game development journey, that last question was sort of, you did Darknet Remastered. I've seen various devs have to like figure out, how do I keep my old projects alive as
Mhm.
they make the jump to new systems, new input schemes, and it's interesting to see you evolve sword fighting between this game and your latest one, Ironstrike. And I guess I'm curious how you thought about branching these ideas off into different ones, or whether you thought about putting them together,
Mhm.
and if one is more popular than the other. Is like, how popular is Ironlights, or is Ironstrike more popular? Like, how is that
Yeah, that's a good
affecting your
question.
thinking?
Yeah. Iron Strike, to answer the last part, Iron Strike has a larger current player base. Iron Lights has had stronger sales and
Interesting.
stronger
Okay.
momentum basically at equivalent points in their launch timeline. And I think there's a few things that factor into that. I think one of the big ones is that Iron Lights came out in 2020 when the Quest 2 wasn't yet a thing,
Yeah.
and it was really like an opportune moment for releasing a new Quest game. And the store was not very crowded at all. And even though at the time, as always, I feared that I was far too late, late to the party, that wasn't true. It was really like the perfect time. With Iron Strike, which came out in late 2023, or was it late 2024,
Mhm.
it was a different story. Things were no, it would be late 2023. Yes, that was correct the first time. Things were getting a little bit more crowded. There's a lot more games out there, and it's harder for a new game to stand out. And I think it was still easier to stand out. It's still sort of a smaller pond than, for example, like Steam or most consoles, but becoming more difficult. And then since then, the store for the Quest has opened up entirely, and so you're competing with really quite a large flood of games. And this is a dynamic that I think a lot of developers anticipated, and it was well communicated. We saw it coming, but it is tricky. It's difficult to work around, and I'm not really sure, sort of what like the answer is. There's no, there probably shouldn't be like an easy path to success for a game developer.
Yeah.
It's a line of work that really ought to be hard because it's a dream job. Um, but I'm not sure sort of what my next step is going to be. And I think it is possible that as the entire ecosystem grows and grows up, it might become less advantageous for small indie game developers like myself, or maybe more accurately, it might equalize with the difficulty that you see in other markets like Steam,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
the mobile
Interesting
market.
framing.
Yeah,
That is.
I think it's
Uh,
more that VR used to be a really ideal place for a new indie dev to get their start, and now it's more similar to other game markets.
Fascinating to
Okay.
think about, and we've gotten to witness you push your way through, right? Like, the market that you joined is not the market that is available now, and the advice that you might recommend to someone new might doesn't apply because it's not the same set of circumstances as when you got into it.
Right.
Um,
I could expand on
Fascinating.
that actually.
Well,
Um,
let me ask you. So let me give you. Yeah, I want you to expand on that, and I'm going to leave this as our last comment. All right. So like, let's end this stream after this. But I want to thank you as you answer this last question for giving us your time, and I want to leave on the note that you're going off on paternity leave,
mhm.
Yes.
and you had, to my understanding, you had to build that time for yourself. I mean, you would have had to have made enough sales off of your games to ensure you could take that time. Is that right? And do you wish that there were, you know, this was easier for more people to do, or Yeah, explain. Put this in context of your actual life as before we let you go. How were you able to give yourself paternity leave?
Um, yeah, it basically means that I'll be living off savings for a few months, for as long as I choose to take, which is probably going to be a few months. I think having seen some of the difficulty of pregnancy and anticipating the transition of becoming a new parent, it is something that I wish everybody could enjoy. Um, I don't feel like it's easier as an indie dev because obviously there's nobody who's going to like keep paying me any regular salary during this
Right.
time. I'm basically just not working, just not quitting, quitting for a couple of months. Um, and I have been very fortunate to be able, to be in a position to do that. Um, I, there was maybe a brief moment in time when I felt like I was doing super awesome and had struck it rich. And that moment has passed. Maybe if I had bought Bitcoin like we talked about at the beginning of this interview, then all would be different. I don't feel like I'm, I, I could retire now, and I will have to, worry about getting back to work and making my next thing and figuring out how to continue keeping the dream alive of being an indie game dev. But the fact that I've been able to keep it going already for 12 years is miraculous to me. And I think if I went back and talked to my younger self and said, if you set out on this, you'll be able to make it work for at least 12 years, I would consider that a dream come true. So I feel
That's
very
fantastic.
blessed.
That is so fantastic, man. I just, watching you all the way from the days of the Gear VR to now has been amazing. It's been amazing to see your journey. E.
Thank you.
Thank you for the time, E, and thank you for that statement. Beautiful perspective to have. That's E McNeill with Darknet, Ironstrike, and Ironlights. We've got Don Hopper out there playing with him and diving into all the features. He gave us a secret cheat code in Darknet at the beginning of this that gave us unlimited Bitcoin that we all wished we had
Oh
acquired
yes.
when we started on this VR journey now. Thank you to Beck for putting this stream together for us, and thank you to all of our members out there for supporting us. We did this as a members first stream to get some intimate questions from our members out there with some developers. We're going to keep doing this. This has been enormously successful to my eyes. Thank you, E, for sort of inaugurating this format for us. We're gonna keep working on this. We've got some great devs lined up.
Oh
We'll
yeah.
see you in the future. Come back for Don playing some modded games here very soon.
Yeah, very,
We'll
very
see you
soon.
later.
Like, just gonna take a quick break and then join us for the next stream.
Thank you so
So,
much for having me.
We'll
thanks,
see
E.
you, Ian. Have a great paternity leave, and hopefully we'll talk to you with your next game very soon.
Sounds good.
Talk to you later.